What's up? Cheers, Worcester. It's February the 20th, 2018, and this is 508, a show about Worcester. Today we're talking about housing, transit, and maybe even net neutrality. I'm Mike Benedetti, and this is Brendan Milliken.
How's it going, Mike?
It's going good, Brendan. How are you?
Well, I'm sitting a little bit closer to you than I normally do when we do this show, and I just want to make sure you're okay with that.
I'm good. Why don't we move the camera a little bit?
Yeah, we can do that. There we both are.
That was great. That was great. We just moved the camera a little bit.
Yep.
I don't think it helped. We're broadcasting on Worcester's Unity Radio, 0.0000001 gigawatts of power on 102.9 FM, cablecasting on WCCA TV 194, and podcasting at pieandcoffee.org. You can email us at pieandcoffee@gmail.com, and our call-in number is 508-471-5265. And a special shout out to the mighty Hank Stoltz, who is working the phones and engineering today's show. Possibly we're going to have a guest today, Brendan. Possibly we're not. Our guest isn't here yet. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. And, other than sitting close to you, I wanted to point out to anyone who's just listening at home, Mike is wearing both a long sleeve shirt and a sweater today. And today is probably the warmest day that we've had, definitely the warmest day we've had since the start of the new year. And
I'm just doing whatever it takes to look good, man.
You look fantastic.
Billy Crystal said it. It's better to look good than to feel good.
You know, Mike, I know you've got all sorts of things you want to run through.
Oh, man.
I had one thing I wanted to throw out there that I completely forgot to bring with me the details on, so I'm mostly going to make this up. But right before I left my office this morning, what's his name? William Shatner is coming to Worcester.
Why is that happening?
They're doing a screening of The Wrath of Khan at the Hanover Theater, and then William Shatner is going to do a talk following the screening of The Wrath of Khan.
Star Wars star William Shatner, you'll remember him from the original Star Wars trilogy. He's going to be in Worcester. When's this happening?
You're such a jerk. Yeah. So it's I don't know. That's because I left all the details in my office. But I know tickets get to go on sale on February 23rd.
That's very exciting. That's very exciting. I know a lot of people in Worcester love Star Trek.
Yeah,
that's a cool thing to have happening. You know, there's no city council meeting this week, so I just kind of feel empty inside.
I was eagerly awaiting the email you usually send me with all of the things that the council's going to discuss. It never came through, and I just kind of assumed that you were mad at me or that you had written me off for input. It's actually because they're not meeting.
There's no council meeting this week. There's two news stories this week in Worcester that are probably worth discussing. One of them because it is actually, I guess both of them are actually newsworthy. It's not just because people chose to write about them. One of them is about the WRTA budget, our bus budget, which is an actual thing that people have written actual articles about because the budget is being kicked around. I'm feeling somewhat frustrated about discussing this. If we can just get to press criticism for a second, because I read a lot of articles about this, and they're all terrible. The Worcester journalists, you have a lot of numbers in there, and I think you cut and paste them from someplace, because there's never anybody who's just like, here's a paragraph which is the equivalent of a balance sheet, or a paragraph which is the equivalent of a profit and loss statement, or whatever. And also, I can also put out some complaints this week to the people who, to the city clerk, I guess, would be responsible for this, which is that I cannot find the minutes that have this budget proposal in them. I cannot even find a notice of this meeting on the city website. I think because the meeting was last week, and now they're in the process where they're putting up the annotated version of the agenda from that, the agenda plus the minutes.
Sure.
And in that time frame, since there's no longer a pre-meeting agenda, and there's not yet a post-meeting agenda with notes, there's nothing.
Doesn't exist.
There's nothing. So as of today, there's no budget, there's no WRTA, there's nothing, at least as far as the city's website is concerned.
The only thing that I saw in this article, the one that you're mostly referring to here, this week's issue.
Oh, I'm referring to all articles. But because all the articles
there was some coverage of that board meeting.
Yes,
that was interesting.
Yes,
because it seemed like the takeaway from that meeting was essentially the board sitting back and to everyone who had comments, good comments, irrelevant comments, the board basically said, yeah, we got nothing.
Our hands are tied.
Hands are tied. But to your point, I think there was also no articulation or no one really kind of getting into the weeds on what actually is tying their hands, which is important stuff to understand too, because it's not like Worcester exists in a vacuum, right? Like if there are, say, federal regs that need to be ironed out so that we can make some changes, well, thankfully we've got a congressperson. There are even 2 senators here in the Commonwealth that might be able to help us out. If there's state and local regs, I don't know, maybe we know some people in Beacon Hill. Maybe there are some local elected officials who could get into the weeds and maybe change things up on a local level.
This, usually what this looks like is like the city, maybe the city council wants to remove a bench. And for some reason, removing that bench is in violation of a state law, or rarely a federal law. They do what's called a home rule petition. They go through a whole thing. They're like, we all vote that our local state representative pushed through a thing at the state level allowing us to remove this bench or whatever it is. The city council does this all the time, basically around things as consequential as moving benches. Somehow, though, there are state regulations that are keeping us from having a functional modern bus system, but I have never seen anybody propose a home rule petition around getting rid of the state regulations that keep us from having awesome buses that we can afford.
Well, it is sad in a weird sort of, maybe it's irony, maybe it's hypocrisy. I can never really keep the two straight from a strictly definitions perspective, but in a city where we are constantly complaining about either a lack of parking or increased volume of traffic on the roads, like here we actually have, it's not like a hypothetical thing, there's actually this existing framework for public transportation that could alleviate a lot of the pressures on both of those things that people are constantly complaining about.
But there's laws, Brendan.
But it never actually enters. Those two conversations always exist in these separate silos, right? Like over here we'll have a public transportation conversation that usually devolves into people complaining about Uber. And then over here we'll have a conversation about how we don't have enough parking or there's too much traffic or we need to install 500 new crosswalk lights or whatnot because people are getting picked off in intersections constantly. Those two things go hand in hand, and it's like I don't know, man.
That's an interesting. We do install a tremendous number of new crosswalk lights every year. And some of those already come into compliance with increased regulations on what a crosswalk looks like. But we could definitely do a thing where we say maybe you can't do this politically, but you could do this. You could say, I propose a moratorium on all new crosswalk construction for the next year, and for us to take every one of those budget items that would be a new crosswalk and put that money into the buses.
Well,
and you could say, and maybe we save pedestrian lives by doing that.
And I'm happy you said that because I was about to apologize and acknowledge that I am well aware that I'm sitting next to somebody whose primary mode of transportation is walking. So I'm not being dismissive of our crosswalks.
Let me just say, I'm not the walkingest man in Worcester because that would be Joe Finnerl, obviously. But next to Joe Finnerl, who's a good friend of mine, I'm the second most walkingest man in Worcester. I know all about the crosswalks, Brendan. I know all about the buses, Brendan.
Let me ask you this question then. And then I'll let you go back to because you've got stuff. When it comes to Worcester crosswalks, I did notice in, say, comparison to, say, Boston or New York or whatnot.
Our guest is outside. Hold on, I'm going to go get our guest.
I'm just going to keep talking to everybody else and, whatever. Well, so what I was going to ask Mike, and
it's funnier if I do it, Hank.
We'll answer for him. Is in our crosswalks here in the city of Worcester, Hank, you and I are going to talk about this. So we install a new crosswalk. It tends to be a 20-second timer, right? You go to Boston or you go to New York, they almost always tend to be 10-second timers. And I've always been trying to figure out, like, what is it about Worcester that we feel it takes this much more time for the chicken to cross the proverbial road? And the long-term impact that actually has on the volume of traffic that you see.
I don't know. I'll tell you two things. One is whether lights are flashing or not. Crossing down by Union Station and going across that square, I think you are taking your life in your hands as you are at many places. The second is that if I was sight impaired, with all those beeps and everything, I'm sure that they give you a course, and it is because I am a sighted person.
Yeah.
But it seems as if there is this lag time before the beeps start, and then what the beeps. I'd be concerned about that as well. I don't know if that goes along with the 20 seconds.
It actually totally does.
But
when I was working downtown most recently, there was always this funny thing where if you're standing down by the intersection of Main Street and Main Street and Front Street.
All right.
The beeps that go off on that crosswalk they tend to they tend to ricochet off the buildings. So you'll actually be hearing the alerts for folks that are blind from like down the street. You won't actually be hearing them anywhere close by. Might you actually?
Could I just
yeah,
pull
you
my-
unplugged.
I was going to say we are certainly still in and we are certainly still broadcasting. Why don't we take a quick break and we'll get our microphones back.
All right. What did I do?
You unplugged something over here when you jumped up. There's going to be some sort of.
So we still have levels.
I think
So
it's right
it's
here.
still going out. It is just something that went to our headphones.
The headphones.
There we go.
Just plug it back in.
So everything that we said was still going out
Yeah.
over the air.
Great.
Just our headphones.
Great.
No more quick movements.
Okay, sorry about that. And Holmes is finishing up the conference call, and then we'll walk in whenever he's done. He knows where to sit. Thanks for doing that.
Well, I don't know what we did because I couldn't hear anything.
It was fascinating. Whatever it was, I'm sure.
Worcester Physical Therapy Services. Visit worcpt.com for more information.
So, well, we're still recording. What I was gonna ask you before you jumped up and ran away. When it comes to our crosswalks, do you find that like the timing on them is the appropriate time or longer or shorter? I think I mentioned this to you once before. When I was working out in Boston, it seemed like most of their 4-lane roads and even 2-lane roads, there were 10-second timers to cross from one side to the other. And I noticed when we install new,
Ours are longer than that.
they tend to be 20 plus or 20 depending on the. And I don't know if it's like one of those things that
It seems reasonable.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it seems reasonable. I mean,
Because I'm primarily a driver, I always tend to view things from like, what's the impact of this having?
it feels like it takes forever when the
Yeah.
crosswalk is on. It's true. I mean, it also feels like it takes forever whenever you're waiting for 3 different kinds of traffic signals to go
Sure.
before you can cross the street.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, Councillor Rosen is quoted in one of these articles as saying that our transportation system is not functional. And I think in the broadest sense, this is very much true. As I've said before, this is not a walkable city, not a drivable city, not
Sure.
a busable city.
Yeah.
Right, you want to come back and go till 31 when we normally would, or you want another shorter?
Yeah, we can
So
go
31 is good.
Let's,
All right.
yeah. Thrill of a lifetime. Get your tickets and come in. Killers of the Amazon can devour a cow in a matter of seconds, can leave nothing but the bare bones. First time shown in your city and you may never have the chance to see it again. Alive, 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 the deadly piranhas. $10,000 reward, if not absolutely alive. Never before shown and you may never again have the chance to see it again. The most terrifying flesh eaters from the deep. Brendan Melican and myself, Michael Benedetti.
I'm always pleasantly surprised when you spring something like that on me, Mike. I have no idea what happened.
Alive.
Wasn't sure where that was going to go, and I wasn't even sure if I was safe at that moment in time. But that was beautiful. Thank you for that.
And also, I can confirm on today's show, another one of the deadly flesh eaters from the deep, Holmes Wilson, will be on later.
I thought he was already here. What happened to him?
He's on the phone.
He's still in makeup?
He's probably doing an interview with somebody more important. I understand. Prioritize. I would be doing the same.
We were
thing.
talking about public transportation until Holmes shows up, because
Sure.
that could be in a minute, that could be in 20 minutes.
We could talk about heroin.
Sure, talk about heroin.
I mean, the other news story of the week. I mean, we could roll back to public transportation and talk about solutions, but did you talk about solutions yet?
No,
Well, then let's not do.
Okay, well.
We're already. I feel like we're in a bitchy, non-productive mood so far on today's show. We should keep that going. And whenever we crash from that, then we start to talk about solutions. That's like
Fair enough. No, I think that's the right approach.
This is a news story because the ownership on a building has changed lately, and Mass Live has an awesome article today called "Heroin, Squatters, and Absent Owners: How One Worcester Developer Plans to Save the City's Worst Property."
It actually is a really great story.
It's a great story. This is about 1 Quincy Street, which is also known as 85 Chatham Street.
How is that, Mike?
What?
How is that? How can one place be two places?
I don't know. I mean, it's known as 85 Chatham Street. I think it might actually be one on the front of the building.
Okay.
The city knows it is 85 Chatham Street. This is a building I walk. This is a building in my neighborhood. I walk past this building all the time. I know people who live in this building. And I have been following the dramas around this building, mostly from my neighborhood crime watch. I can just read a couple of the relevant paragraphs from this great article by Dan Glown at Mass Live. He said that this guy, Ed Murphy, just bought the building. He closed the deal this month, paying $425,000, less than half the building's $975,000 list price. And regardless of the vacancies, vagrancy, and basement drug deals, Murphy is investing in upgrades and believes he can make it work. I honestly don't think the property is that bad, just improperly managed, Murphy said. We're just going to properly manage it. In 1998, the property's owner, Chatham Street Realty Trust, received $388,000 in public financing from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership Fund Board in exchange for agreeing to an affordable housing covenant. The building would be dedicated to providing housing to low and very low income families, making a maximum of 65% of the area's median income. In 2006, the city began foreclosure on the property for unpaid taxes. Chatham Street Realty Trust came to an agreement with the city later that year, but in 2008, both the bank holding the mortgage and the city's tax authorities filed new foreclosure complaints. The city sold the tax title to the property to Plymouth Tax Services LLC, who in 2015 sold it to Propel Financial One LLC. This is a Texas company that specializes in this business. It has not proved responsive as city officials tried to force them to properly maintain the building. The cooperative at 1 Quincy made a Worcester Telegram and Gazette list of troubled properties in 2016. The next year, Worcester Magazine named it the worst property in the city. The trend continued through 2017. According to housing inspection records reviewed by Mass Live, the property was the subject of 19 separate complaints last year, ranging from the presence of squatters and unsecured doors to a lack of heating oil and uncollected trash. So it's interesting to me that this article is framed a bit as like, now this is going to change because it got sold. This sort of reminds me of Worcester journalists' bizarre Groundhog Day-like articles about the South Worcester Industrial Park, which for 17 years, as Nicole Postel once demonstrated, every year on the anniversary of whatever Groundhog Day-like day it was, there would be an article in the Telegram and Gazette which would say, the blighted South Worcester Industrial Park. Nobody loves that place, but now something has happened and it's all going to get fixed. And then 12 months later, the blighted South Worcester Industrial Park. But now, and this is in recent years finally slowly begun to get de-brownfielded and developed. I feel like this article, starts off by being like, everybody who's owned this building has done a terrible job managing it. But now, this guy is going to do it. I hope that he does.
If there is something to be said for that, the big difference is you're going from two different parties that are not from the region, that were really just property management firms that really aren't interested in property management but title acquisition, to conceivably local ownership, which it strikes me as probably one of the biggest problems we have in housing in general in the city or non property.
Absentee landlords, absentee management.
The absentee management and that's a relatively new thing to Worcester. You only have to go back a generation or two before you find out our 3-deckers were almost entirely occupied by multiple generations of one family or various wings of one family. Owner occupancy rates were never really an issue. Never mind rates of owners being in a region, that's like close enough that like mail might get to them in a day or two. That's at least one nice change. You've got somebody finally who could potentially be responsive to both the neighborhood and the city, as opposed to Propel Financial Services, right? Like, what's the likelihood of them coming to a neighborhood watch meeting to hear complaints about squatting or?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about this because, like I said, like this is in my neighborhood, and I've lived in that neighborhood a long time. I've only been going to the neighborhood watch meetings for about a little over a year, I guess now. Both as a neighborhood resident and as someone who, because of my civic activism, am responsible for some parts of the neighborhood. Those neighborhood watch meetings are great. They're not super well attended, but the people there are a dream team. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite pound for pound activist organizations I was ever working with in Worcester was called Real Solutions. This is something we worked a lot around, the treatment of the poor, especially treatment of very, very poor people like homeless people in Worcester. And it was kind of a thing where, once a week or once every couple of weeks, you would get a group of 6 people together to talk about what was going on and strategize. But it would be like just the right people.
Mm-hmm.
It would be, you would have like somebody from legal assist, like the president of legal assistance would be there, and the president of this would be there, and like other superstars like myself would be there, or like Kevin Kassen would be there. And so it would be the kind of thing that you would develop a certain level of trust, and you could just kind of like resolve things quickly. There wouldn't have to be a lot of stuff around like, oh, let's email this guy, and see what they say. So do we need to go to a break here soon? Oh, are we having people trying to prank call the show? If we are, we should let them through.
No.
Okay. I can just keep babbling about how much I love neighborhood watch meetings. I love these neighborhood watch meetings, Brendan. It's like the politicians who represent the neighborhood are there, the state rep, the city councilor. It's people from the code department. It's people from the DA's office. It's people who are property owners. It's people who have complaints.
But that's the key, though, when we're talking about blighted properties in the cities. I think for the last couple decades, the majority of properties that are going to hit that big hit list every year, whether it be Worcester Magazine or the Telegram of blighted properties, that the ownership of them isn't going to be something that's responsive.
Yes.
The fact that this guy is willing, and I think it's probably similar to some extent with the Albion.
The Albion, right.
At least you've got somebody who's willing to start off the new conversation with a news story, or like being featured, like their pictures out there,
Right.
their name is in the lead. We all know who they are now. I mean, that's a
Right.
pretty good way to open up a new conversation
It
about a problem building. You said you're familiar with this one here, and you said you people who live there. Like,
Familiar. I'm more familiar than anyone who wrote articles about this,
Yeah.
but I'm not familiar with this.
but I mean, from your perspective, are the people that you know living there that, like, without ratting anybody out, are they on the squatting side, or are they? Because they made it sound like there's
I
very
don't know.
few legitimate
I
tenants
know
there.
people. I know people who have pretty questionable housing situations.
Mhm.
Nobody who I know who has a questionable housing situation is based out of that
Yeah.
building. The people who I know who live in that building are people who live there legit. This is definitely one of the buildings in the neighborhood. I think there might be only a couple where there's a lot of, people living in the stairwells, people living in the basement, people ripping the doors off, and doing drugs in places and whatever. And this is definitely a problem for a neighborhood whenever you've got some business buildings like this. One thing I'll say is that even though I can be cynical, and this is maybe where my grouchiness and
I thought that was
cynicism
my
is
role.
worn off.
You're the cynical one now?
I was cynical at the beginning, but I'm starting to get less interested in that as the show goes on. Like, I have seen the non-Groundhog Day situation happen in these crime watch meetings over and over in the year plus that I've been going to them, which is that there's problems with the property.
Sure.
And people are like, oh, there's problems with the property. And for a couple of months, it's like, come on. It's more and more problems with the property. Oh my goodness. And then the problems start to get resolved, and they start to get resolved, and then the problems get resolved. And I've seen multiple problem properties have their problems resolved in just the year that I've been there. So I totally believe that, like, if this management guy is willing to send some people down to these crime watch meetings and get involved with talking to the city, these problems could go away.
So obviously, you might be more familiar with this from a neighborhood perspective, but what do you think the tone and the tolerance in the neighborhood is going to be? So this guy obviously has some plans for the building. He is under agreement with the city at least till 2028 to keep it affordable housing.
And we should say something which I feel like the articles have not really been clear on. That I think this is a 3-story and I believe a 16-unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a sizable building.
Yeah.
It's good thing for the neighborhood overall if they start raising the bar in terms of accommodations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think I feel like this building is not indicative of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
This is not like this neighborhood is not like this is like one crazy building in the midst of otherwise non-crazy buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wonder how far we go with this building in particular before we find ourselves in another gentrification conversation.
Already, I'm sure already we're going to be in a gentrification conversation. The idea that people, I'm very supportive of people having a place to live. I'm very against, spent a lot of my life working against homelessness, but once you start talking about, we're going to try to have people not be able to rip the door off the building anymore, there's definitely some people on a certain fringe who their hackles go up.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's going to be, I think the neighborhood as a whole is
Who
not.
are you hanging out with that has moral opposition to doors, Mike? Doors are pretty useful. I bet if I turn to my left here and start talking to Holmes, I bet even Holmes is going to agree with me that doors are pretty awesome, right, Holmes? You don't have any huge issues with doors, do you?
Not usually.
Yeah, see?
The battery is dying on our camera.
No,
We don't have a long USB cord, do we?
I don't have I just have this open-ended question about what is happening in your universe with doors.
Let me tell you. How's our battery dying already? This is crazy. I want to welcome to the show Holmes Wilson. Hi, Holmes.
Hi.
Holmes Wilson is co-founder of Fight for the Future, a nonprofit digital civil liberties organization that first gained renown in the fight against SOPA in 2011, and is a internationally known internet activism legend. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for coming on the show. And you're wearing your Free Beaver shirt.
I am.
That was one of the first cool things that Fight for the Future did back in the day. Get Justin Bieber out of jail.
Yeah, it was a campaign we did because there was some legislation on the table supported by the motion picture lobby that was attempting to just make it, basically shift the balance around copyright laws to make it so that it was the rules were so strict about posting copyrighted material online that basically anything could count as copyright infringement, even criminal copyright infringement. And it's the kind of thing where there was one law that said if you post copyrighted material to a video streaming site, you could go to prison for 5 years. And this could be you singing somebody else's song in a YouTube video or something like that. Something really innocuous.
And that's something that Justin Bieber had sort of done his early promotion by singing covers on YouTube.
Yeah, so we were thinking about what's the best example of someone who has totally violated this law in a completely innocuous way that everybody knows. And the best example was Bieber, because he came up, the way he got discovered was singing Chris Brown and Usher songs to karaoke backing tracks that were probably copyrighted on YouTube. When he was 8 or something, sounding awesome, and he and that's what got him famous. And this was a law that literally would have put anyone who did that, or would have made anyone who did that, subject to crazy penalties, and could literally have put him in jail. And so we made him the mascot for the campaign, and made the campaign all about Free Bieber, and made a site about the pictures of Justin Bieber behind bars, wearing a jumpsuit, with face tattoos and all this stuff, and made a joke out of it, but in a serious way, where we're trying to explain, what the collateral damage could be of changing these relatively arcane copyright laws, the campaign worked. We got 80,000 signatures on a petition when some awesome YouTubers picked it up, and then someone asked Bieber about it on a radio show. A show maybe not unlike this one, a radio show in Washington D.C. Bieber's on promoting his tour, and
that show is nothing like this one.
and the host asks Bieber, "Hey, what about this law that would make it a crime to sing songs on YouTube without permission?" And he just went off. He said, "This law is ridiculous. Whichever senator is proposing this law should be the one thrown in jail. My fans should be free to do what they want." He completely nailed all the talking points. He's 17 at the time,
right.
Nailed all the talking points. In the meantime, Justin Bieber's robo-lawyers, these folks who you kind of hire on contract to just sue anyone who uses your name in anything, were in the process of suing us. And we hadn't responded to it yet, and we're working on our press release. Bieber sues us, and then someone sends us this link to this radio interview that had happened the night before that somehow we miss, and we listen to it and our jaws drop. So it's hold the presses. The headline is not Bieber sues Fight for the Future. The headline is Bieber supports Fight for the Future in our battle against ridiculous changes to these laws, and so that was that, and then later we ended up developing the campaign in a much more serious and sincere way to inform the public about what these laws meant, to organize people around a big day of action that we called American Censorship Day, that got big sites like Tumblr and Boing Boing and Mozilla and Reddit involved in fighting the legislation that was on the table, and then that snowballed into this really epic, giant day of action that Wikipedia and basically every site on the internet that was known in any way participated in to stop in the 11th hour, right before the vote was about to happen in the Senate, to stop SOPA and PIPA.
And this was just a couple of months between sort of being oh no, this is coming down, maybe this Justin Bieber thing will work, to total victory.
Yeah, total victory. I don't know.
Let me talk to somebody else who knows about total victory. Hank Stoltz. How are we doing on time? Do we need to cut away? 2 minutes. All right.
Oh, well,
What can you squeeze into 2 minutes, Holmes?
Let me start you off by asking the first non-T-shirt based question, which should just sort of be how do you get to the point where you wake up in the morning and you say, you know what I'm going to do professionally is I'm going to become an internet digital civil liberties activist. How does that happen?
Well, for me, the way it worked, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people who get into stuff like this, is they read the newspaper for a while and they saw a certain debate. Well, I read the newspaper a lot growing up. I delivered the newspaper here in Worcester. I read the newspaper a lot as a result of delivering it. And in the late 90s, I was still reading the newspaper a lot. And as Napster and these things were getting shut down, or as like there were these different clashes between things on the internet and existing laws and institutions. And I was always really unsatisfied with how the debate went. It kind of seemed like whatever I considered to be my side was just getting steamrolled in the press by the lobbyists and the shills and the sort of spokespeople for these big media companies that were trying to protect their turf. And the folks on the internet side of things, who had a really valid argument in a bunch of ways, were making really weak arguments most of the time and just getting destroyed. And so it just started making me mad. You know, you get that kind of like throwing stuff at the TV feeling, where you're saying the things you wish they would say, and you hear that voice in your head trying to kind of make the argument the best way you can. And eventually, since it's the internet, you say, well, screw it, I'm going to make a webpage about this. So a friend and I, we made a webpage about something, about the narrative about music and the music industry around the time that the major record labels were just preparing to start suing individual fans for downloading music, and about iTunes, which was kind of hailed as the grand alternative, the grand bargain or something. And we made a site about it, and just kind of laying out how we felt and what we thought the arguments were, and being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but being pretty serious. And the site went viral, and had an amazing reception. And so we built an organization around it, essentially. The organization was called Downhill Battle, and yeah, that's how I got sucked in. I heard that voice in my head that needed to say something that wasn't being said. A friend and I made a website. It went really, really well, and then once something goes well on the internet, you start to get this feeling like, okay, this is what I should be doing.
Speaking of things going well on the internet, we'll be back after these important messages on 508. Great. We're just completely confused on time today. So, because I don't know why we're confused on time. So this is this is our second commercial break right now? Okay, so this is a 3-minute break.
When we come back in, if you're not opposed, I would really love to kind of build upon what you were just talking about, but more in the context of, I feel as though because we've all known each other for so long, like anytime we talk about this stuff, it's in the context of like, oh, like Holmes is doing this. This is a dude we've always known, but like from a very Worcester perspective, like completely missing the idea that there are like senators in the Midwest who have to drive to like their constituents' office or every day and see the billboards that you folks are putting up. Like I feel like we have a bad habit of talking about some of the stuff that you've done because we're in Worcester as though it's this local thing without really allowing people to grasp the concept of how
our next segment is kind of our last.
Yeah, and then we'll just have the wrap up. So just because of just to cover up our
activism,
plug it in the headphones, we just went
universe right
about
now, but like
7 minutes early.
Here, we kind of view it as this thing, like you're sitting on this local radio station, right?
But now we'll be
a
back.
good way to actually allow that to
around 51, we'll
unpack
take a
itself
quick
a little
break,
bit
and then you'll have the 5
lives.
minutes to wrap up at the end of the show.
Well, maybe, sort of depends on who the audience is, but depends on who the audience is.
Well, totally, but I think it's important that this is a very local audience, and I think that's
one
the
more
point.
minute
Like,
of this?
Yeah.
30 seconds?
this audience needs to know
one more,
that, like, there are
one
things
more
that
after this. So you do
that
have,
may very well
so
blossom
you have
here in
another
Worcester,
one
that
minute.
have had a massive impact elsewhere in the world that were not the Valentine's Day card.
Virginia, thank you for listening, and thank you for helping to spread the word.
And nobody's tried to call in yet?
Nobody has tried to call it.
Okay.
102.9 FM at WorcesterMag.com.
Unity Radio is streaming on unityradioTNA.org. You can also listen on WUNC 102.9 FM. Please I'd like to thank our listeners and supporters.
TD Bank, America's most convenient bank. For more information, go to tdbank.com. Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare of Worcester. Visit harvardpilgrim.org. And Wings Over Worcester. To learn more, visit wingsoverworcester.com.
Unity Radio, Worcester's Community Connection.
This Justin.
This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. And this is Michael Benedetti on 508 Show About Worcester. And this is Brendan Milliken. Hi, Brendan.
How's it going, Mike? Hey, just wanted to point out real quick to the listening
You
audience.
just
there.
broke my spell.
Totally broke your spell. Yeah, we managed to get the camera back online. We managed to get our headphones back in.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything else that
We've
you've foreseen might be going sideways tonight?
We sort of rebooted every piece of technical equipment during the show today.
If there's something else that you want to point out might go sideways, I'll take care of it now if you want.
This is Holmes Wilson, and how are you doing, Holmes?
Doing great.
You were just telling the story of starting Downhill Battle. Who was the person who you made the website with for that initially?
It was Nicholas Rebel,
Uh-huh.
who I went to high school with here in Worcester, and then soon afterwards, another friend of ours, Tiffany Cheng, joined us, and Tiffany and I ended up being the co-founders of Fight for the Future.
So Downhill Battle went relatively pretty well, from my perspective as somebody who was not really involved with Downhill Battle at the time. And then you did that for a while, and then you moved on to other projects for a few years.
Yeah.
And then it came back around to feeling. Did it just feel like now is the time to do this with a different name, or?
It was more that we were doing this this kind of activism where we were less focused on like just building an email list or kind of being an organization, and more just focused on straight output, just making things that would change the debate about these issues, and kind of getting in there and saying what needed to be said. And we were using humor, and we were doing it creatively in a way that really worked with the internet. And when we stopped doing it to go work on other things, we worked on these open source software projects for distributing media and for participating in government.
Right.
That were more like, okay, let's do activism by building tools instead of doing it ourselves. We felt like there was kind of this hole that had been left where there wasn't the same kind of voice, that same kind of provocative voice that we developed,
Right.
talking about these issues and shifting the debate. And some other folks felt that way too in the space. I think that was, people kind of had that like nostalgia for the days when Downhill Battle was putting out crazy fun campaigns on things.
Right, like I mean, one of the things that you did around copyright involved the great what was this Eyes on the Prize, that great documentary series about the civil rights movement.
Yeah, that was a really interesting
And
campaign.
you had a big campaign around like getting people to like have illegal public screen. I mean, illegal just because of weird copyright things. Public screenings of this show. I mean, just like again, like very creative things that are not like the first 20 things you would think off the top of your head of how to lobby Congress around this stuff.
Yeah, and so there was this gap that was left, and we actually started a conversation with this amazing foundation called the Media Democracy Fund about potentially filling that gap in some way. And at first it was maybe like, well, maybe we could help some folks get started doing this. Then we were like, hey, this would be fun. Let's just do this ourselves. We weren't sure how long it would go for or what form it would take, but we kind of wanted Fight for the Future was essentially a bet that we could start an organization, that there was enough need for something like this that we could quickly prove our value and also quickly mobilize a group of people around us that would also see that and would be interested in supporting it. And by their donations and stuff like that, or by participating in our campaigns, and that we'd be able to get something off the ground. And the amazing thing about SOPA was we went from some folks in Worcester talking about making a website in August of 2011 to in January of 2012, just a few months later, having defeated this massive, hundreds of millions of dollars of lobbying effort, 6 or 10 years of lobbying work by some of the biggest media companies in America and the biggest drug companies in America, trying to pass a law that would have let them and really any copyright holder and the U.S. government censor the internet. And that it was considered guaranteed to pass, and that ended up passing in most countries, or in many countries in Europe and Asia. We were able to stop that law from passing in the U.S. We were able to just stop it in its tracks in a way that nobody thought was possible. And the end result of that has been that, if you're in Spain right now, there's a lot of websites where you type in a website that you go to every day, and it's just going to be blocked in Spain. There will be some dumb message from the Spanish government that says you can't go to this website anymore. That's true in the UK. That's true in a ton of places. In the U.S., that is not true. And and the reason why it didn't happen in the U.S. was because of this victory that we were able to organize on SOPA. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit in the break, but growing up in Worcester, I think, it's a city where almost like, I think all small cities in America, especially ones that are neighbors to very large metropolises, there's kind of a constant brain drain, a brain drain exactly, but an ambition drain, where a lot of folks who want to kind of take on the world and express themselves end up almost having to move to bigger cities.
Sure.
They kind of end up filtering out of the city in this way to go on to these sort of bigger battles. And the amazing thing about the role the internet played in my life, and this is one of the big reasons why I like fighting for the internet generally as a medium, as a thing, is that is the internet made it so that me and Tiffany and Nicholas and others that we worked with here in Worcester could take on these issues without ever having to do that. I mean, we were fighting a legislative battle right at toe to toe with some of the best lobbyists in the world, and we never moved to DC. We would go to DC for meetings and stuff like that, but we never moved to DC. We were able to stay here and do it from here, and that was really interesting. And when you think about it, this new ability to just kind of live the life you want, but tangle with the biggest problems you want to tangle with.
I wanted to talk about what is maybe my the best unexpected surprise that I saw in national news so far this year is this article, which I hope comes to pass. This was in Engadget, Ars Technica. It's called "Why Mickey Mouse's 1998 Copyright Extension Probably Won't Happen Again" by Timothy B. Lee. And the perpetual extension of copyright is one of these battles like SOPA that people on the internet, people on Slashdot, people on Boing Boing have been complaining about for 20 years now. And it's like every time, it's like Congress is going to pass some dumb internet law. Let's organize against it. We organize against it. Of course Congress passes the dumb law. Congress is going to extend copyright again just so that Mickey Mouse doesn't go out of copyright, even though literally George Washington would have said that Mickey Mouse should be out of copyright by now. Literally Ben Franklin, who I think in some cartoons may have had Mickey Mouse living in his basement.
No, because they were super allergic to patents. The founders of the United States were pissed about the way the Crown or the way England was using its patent system to oppress authors in the U.S. and to mess with them, and so they were all about a really, really radical stance on patents and copyright.
Right, they're having a functional system, but a functional system, not a system that allows you to say, I invented Mickey Mouse 1 million years ago, I don't have to do anything ever again. It was to say, listen, you invented Mickey Mouse 1 million years ago, make a ton of money off of Mickey Mouse, God bless you, and then a generation down the line, maybe Mickey Mouse is just something everybody can use because that's how culture functions. But so this extension is a thing which they make these. Milton Friedman, like these grand economists from the right, like spoke up against saying like this is the dumbest thing in the world, these copyright extensions, right? But yet this part of the argument never could get any traction. Whereas here we have an argument saying why it won't happen again, and why won't it happen again? According to Timothy B. Lee, why is it likely that a year from now, every book, film, and song published in 1923 will fall out of copyright protection, something that hasn't happened in 40 years? At least that's what will happen if Congress doesn't retroactively change copyright law to prevent it, as Congress has done 2 previous times. And why is this? The answer is because the fight after the SOPA fight, Hollywood likely knows the public would fight back, wrote Daniel Nazer, an attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, in an email to ours. I suspect that big content knows it would lose the battle and is smart enough not to fight. I mean, I feel like not only have Fight for the Future been a part of these battles that have won things like, at least for a while, net neutrality, SOPA, all these other battles, to change the playing field so that some battles that would have happened, the battle doesn't even happen. You win before you start. I mean, hopefully this comes to pass and there's not some sneaky copyright extension, but it's amazing to read this. Instead of reading an article that says, of course it's going to pass, to say, of course it's not going to pass.
Well, no, that's a real dynamic. I mean, sometimes you can win so hard that you make any attempt to redo that thing look almost ridiculous or laughable. Mm-hmm. That's what happened with SOPA. We won so hard that it was just considered toxic or a joke to try to think about passing a site blocking law in the U.S. And that held for most of the Americas, actually. Although now there's an effort underway in Canada. They're fighting site blocking legislation now in Canada. So these things do come back and they have a cycle. But yeah, you can win really hard in a way that lasts. And more than that, I think you can give people hope. And that's the biggest thing that we did with SOPA, I think, was we gave people, in some ways it was the first very palpable example, at least for most internet users, the first real example of having a bill that everyone considered guaranteed to pass, that was also simultaneously extremely unpopular, and then actually using that unpopularity to defeat the bill. It was against massive, massive corporate support.
Mm-hmm.
That was like not something that had ever happened in the internet space, and it had never happened at that scale,
Yeah, it didn't.
and in that kind of visible way. And so it was an amazing story for everyone of just like, whoa, we can't always do this. Like, it's hard, it's still hard,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes we can do this.
Like, we can win. Like,
We can win,
we can
yeah.
win in a big way, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, like, you don't. It doesn't mean you can't always win, but going from we always lose, but we lose in a dignified. I mean, not a dignified way. But like let's use it in an undignified way. Like, we always lose, and at least we're going to fight because at least that's the right thing to do. You go from like you should fight because it's the right thing to do, but guess what? You also might win.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a lot of the work we did on I don't know, a lot of the Fight for the Future work we did was really influenced by the book Black Swan by
Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, Nassim Taleb. And his whole idea is like, in life, you don't really know what's going to happen. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen is full of it. And so your best bet is always to create a kind of floor. Like, do stuff where the worst case scenario is, hey, you gave it a good shot. But also do it in a way where the best case scenario is, if everything goes your way, you actually create some explosive new set of circumstances that totally changes the playing field and just guarantees a victory for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of approach that we took to Fight for the Future, is make sure that all of our campaigns have a floor in terms of how well they'll do, but they never have a ceiling in terms of how well they'll do. And that's really important, I think, when you're working in politics these days, because the internet is constantly changing how politics happens in ways that are mostly invisible until all of a sudden they are visible.
Mm-hmm.
And the internet is always making collective action more possible, more fruitful, and you never ever know what's going to work the next time around, because the ground is always shifting under our feet in ways that give an advantage to the grassroots.
We have 2 minutes from this section. Did you want to say something, Brendan?
I always want to say something nice, but I didn't want to interrupt you or
Oh.
Holmes. No, but what you were just getting at, I think this is what blows me away, and we've talked about this before privately as small groups and whatnot, that and you're always very humble about this and acknowledge the massive number of people who've been involved with all of the activities that you've been involved with. But the reality is that you've got this small group of people from Worcester who have kind of been the tip of the spear for this like massive undertaking that is almost been revolutionary in terms of the way people organize and affect change online and using that as a medium. And I find it to be the most potentially inspiring thing as just a Worcester story alone, never mind the impact that has been felt globally, that originated from here. Because I feel like that's just one of those things that as a local, like, we don't give ourselves enough credit for. I mean, at the beginning of the show, we were talking about how we have elected officials that look at a budget shortfall with public transportation, and the response is, well, there's some stuff, our hands are tied. But here's a bunch of people
there's laws in the way. How could we as politicians ever change a law? We know nothing about that.
But here's this thing that is probably, it's hard to judge things in their value in real time, but over time will probably be looked back upon by whoever functions as internet historians and say, this was the moment where people actually carved out territory, and that happened here.
Well, I mean, there's reasons for it. In my case, there are some really good schools here.
Mm-hmm.
Mass Academy of Math and Science, an amazing school where they just taught us how to look at systems and and find their levers and pull their levers. But also just Worcester's an amazing place to have a chill life and to focus on the things that you care about. And
I think we all know that, but at the same time, we don't oftentimes just collectively give ourselves credit for our potential and what we're capable of. We throw around words like potential as though they mean something on their own, but rarely do we actually put that potential into motion in a way that really has a lasting impact. And that's all. Every time we have conversations about what you've done and what you do and the people around you continue to do, I can't help but feel it's long-term just one of the best Worcester stories we actually have as part of our collective narrative.
Well, speaking of our collective narrative, Hank, do we want to take a phone call, or do we want to go to a break first?
Let's take a call.
We've got a caller. This always goes great. Caller, hi. Hi. Hey, how's it going? You're on the radio. Do you have some thoughts around net neutrality and something about activism or something maybe? Terrific, and terrific. Yeah, hey, thanks for calling in.
That was another.
That was another great call.
Well, this is the amazing thing about these issues is it's just everybody, like, the amount of public support for an internet that works well and where everything just kind of makes sense and where no one's messing with you, whether it's a government or your cable company or one of the big internet companies, is just so universal that when you go out there and try to work on this stuff, it's amazing how the support is everywhere you turn. And I don't know. I mean, just to go back to your point before, I think Worcester is, well, one of the greatest, as an activist who does stunts, one of the greatest activist stunts ever, right, is Abby Hoffman throwing dollar bills off the New York Stock Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
He's from Worcester. There's a tradition of that kind of stuff.
You and I have had this conversation in the past, and I hope to do this someday, but my plan at some point when I'm bored and maybe really, really wealthy is I've had this idea for a one-man show that captures the revolutionary history of Worcester going back to when it was the village of Quinsigamond. Because if you can almost look at every generation from the village of Quinsigamond being burnt down to today and find a generation where there was really a massive social change or uprising that originated oddly here in Worcester. General Gage wouldn't come anywhere near the village of Quinsigamond because of all the crazy farmers that wouldn't give up their guns when the folks in Boston were pushing their cannons into the harbor just to keep the British at bay, right? I mean, we ran the Ku Klux Klan out of town in the 1920s only because the Irish and Italian Catholics that historically wanted nothing to do with each other came together over this common enemy. I mean, you mentioned Abby Hoffman, who's probably the most locally infamous activist because Worcester has always had a weird relationship with them. But really, every generation, I know I left out a few generations there, but we're going up to a break here.
Big moments in the women's movement, big moments in the labor movement happened here.
I mean, there are even a couple of stories about ice cream shops that involve just a massive revolutionary.
Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman planned their ill-fated assassination attempt at Henry Frick in Worcester. We're going to a break. We'll be back. This is 508, a show about Worcester.
Yeah, no, maybe it's the water. I don't know.
Is that the end of the show, or are we coming back for a wrap?
No, let's come back at 57 and give you guys 3 minutes to
wrap up.
To wrap it up.
There's just something so cool there to me that there's anytime it seems like there's wood being put to something that's the only time that Worcester seems to get out of its way and actually do stuff. It's not to be dismissive of what we are, but we seem to always be good at being this rank and file sort of just kind of go along with the motions and some guy said there's no money for buses. Guess we're not having buses this year. But you take those buses away, and something tells me that we'll invent a new form of transportation. That
there was a time when people literally burned the city to the ground multiple times over things,
Yeah, no, but your story again. I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt here. We've talked about this a million times in the past, and it's I'm just fascinated by this idea that at the time even kids, right? All intents and purposes, kids in Worcester managed to put the wood to one of the most well-funded lobbying efforts in the history of mankind.
It's a Scooby-Doo kind of thing.
What do you want to talk about in your last couple minutes? I'm going to talk about Piranhas for a minute, and then we'll just have another minute to touch on last thoughts, advice.
I don't know. I have one thought about why Worcester, which is maybe it's sort of abstract, but it's the kind of plays in Peoria idea where if you live in a really non-representative, unusual place, it's difficult for you to think about solutions that really work politically for people, or ways of talking about things that work politically for people. I have an idea about that. DC,
Thrill of a lifetime. Get your tickets and come in. Killers of the Amazon. Can devour a cow in a matter of seconds. Can leave nothing but the bare bones. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that I'm talking about Brendan Milliken and Holmes Wilson, as well as myself, Michael Benedetti, on 508, a show about Worcester. The call-in number is 508-471-5265 if you would like to be on the radio. Holmes Wilson. We have a minute left.
You say something profound. It's okay. You're not on the spot, right?
Why Worcester? Why Worcester, man?
I think I have an explanation. I think I have a working explanation for this, which is that I don't know. There's that what that story plays in Peoria or something like that from Hollywood, where they would test out films in a very unassuming city. And the reason why they do that is because the reactions that people, you know, if you're in a metropolis like LA or New York, or especially with politics in Washington D.C., the type of conversation that you're participating in is so non-representative of the types of conversations that most people are going to have that it just gets under your skin, and you lose totally your ability to talk about anything in a real way. So like most people who work in DC 24/7, I think, are facing this really terrible handicap when it comes to politics, where they might know the issues inside and out, but they cannot talk about the issues to anyone outside of DC because their whole vocabulary and sense of reality has been totally swayed by what's essentially a gossip mill of people who work on politics all the time. And so if you're in a place like Worcester, you know, there's like education here and transportation here and a nice place to live, and it's pretty chill and whatever. But we are not in that gossip mill at all. So if you have a conversation about politics with someone, you're having a conversation with like most people, essentially. Most people in the country you're having a conversation with, because you're not just like caught up in some bubble. And so I think Worcester, working from Worcester on political issues has always been an amazing asset to us, because we're able to kind of take a fresh look at political issues and about the way people are talking about them, and just kind of talk about it in a direct way and say what things are. SOPA was a censorship bill. If we were in DC, we probably would not have come up with that insight for how to talk about it, because it would have been just harder to see through all the gossip. And Worcester gave us a degree of critical independence and freshness and reality, I think, if we're doing politics, that was just invaluable for the stuff that we work on.
We're kind of running short on time, but a question that I think you can answer probably yes or no. If you're from Worcester, you've spent most of your time here in Worcester, but you've obviously traveled a lot. If all of your activism, if you've decided in your early 20s, whatever, to move to New York, LA, DC, focus there, do you think you could have accomplished the same things, or do you think it's more likely that those well-moneyed organizations you were fighting against probably would have found a way to squash you? Right? Like, is there something
I
almost
been able to accomplish anything? I would have been able to barely accomplish paying my rent.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really end show. No, that's really what I was looking for. I mean, because it's almost something weird, I think, where you can organize and be an activist in a city like Worcester at scale, but because you're here, you're almost off the radar. You almost don't exist, right? I mean, it's like, who's paying attention? Yeah,
we joke about our ghosts sometimes.
Yeah. No one's paying attention to you unless they're listening to 508, a show about Worcester on Worcester's Unity Radio. Our email address is pieandcoffee@gmail.com. Holmes Wilson, Brendan Milliken, Mike Benedetti, thanks for all of you being on the show this week.
Thanks for listening, Worcester.
Hank Stoltz, thank you for being here as usual. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.